Hi, I'm Aaron Kammaker, Senior Field Tech Rep with Tremco CPG, Dryvit Division. Today, I'm here to speak to you about the Canadian Outsulation Masonry Veneer System. Before we get started on the installation and the tools required, I'd like to introduce Amanda Seneca, one of the lead engineers for the project, where she will review some of the explicit details that you need.
Hi, I'm Amanda Seneca. I work for Dryvit, division of Tremco CPG, and senior technical specialist, specializing mostly in the Canadian market. What I'd like to tell you about the Outsulation Masonry Veneer System is the specifications have about a page and a half of details and limitations that you really need to look at if you will be installing this system. There's going to be a maximum weight of stone, there's standards reference for what type of masonry veneer thin brick that you can install according to our specifications. It's all in there. A few things that I'd like to point out in particular. The system, the substrate, needs to meet L over 360 deflection. Our systems usually are L over 240. So this is a more stiff, so to speak, system. And that's something that the designer, the architect, the engineer for the project will have to take care of. But that's something that, we'd like everybody to be aware of. The other thing in Canada, the height of the installation is usually limited to 3 stories, 10 meters. That, again, is a design decision, but it's something to be aware of. And the last thing I want to point out is there is no acceptable solution in the National Building Code of Canada, the Part B solutions. There isn't one for adhered masonry veneer. So there might be an occasion where you will need to get an acceptable solution according to Part 1. And then, again, you would need an engineer, designer, architect to provide that. And again, we'll look at the specifications and all the limitations that are in there.
And thank you, Amanda. Appreciate your time. And now let's get into the tools and the materials that will be needed for the proper installation. As in most applications, a tape measure is always great to have, along with a tape to tape off areas that need protect. Staple gun that you will use to put up your detail mesh, a mixing blade, the appropriate drill motor, a scoop, along with a hawk. For the notch trowel on the back of the board, you'll need the appropriate trowel, which will be 1/2 inch wide, 1/2 inch high, with a 2-inch spacing in between. A margin trowel. You may even need a traditional trowel, screw gun, and finally, as always, we recommend personal protective device. That should encompass the tools that you will need for the project. So now let's review the materials that you'll be using for the installation of the MVS system. First, again, the application would be of your backstop MTX. You can use either texture or smooth. For the adhesive, you can only use Primus that is wet. So the bucket of Primus, you've got type 1 or GU cement. You will need to use the grooved foam board, a detail mesh for back wrapping. This is the one difference that you will find from our Outsulation system. You will need to use the intermediate mesh, which is a 12-ounce mesh. Standard mesh is not accepted. Mechanical fasteners with a washer. And then the specified masonry veneer or the thin brick veneer. You should read the details in the specifications for the exact product that could be used for that. And with that, let's get into the installation of the MVS system. So now let's look at the preparation of the materials to adhere the foam to the wall. As you can see on the wall itself, we've already had this prepped and ready to go with the backstop. So now what we need to do is mix the primus with the cement. What you're going to do is you're going to receive a bucket. The bucket is a 60-pound bucket. When you do that, you split the bucket in half. So you'll have a 30-pound 30-pound bucket. You will then mix 30 pounds of cement. Today, we're fortunate enough that we have a 30-pound bag of cement, so we have equal proportions in that. And as you can see, when I pour that in, I'm eyeballing that to see if they are equal. So in this one, I know that I'm a little bit shy in the one I just poured in, so I'll just add an additional amount. And now I have equal parts of primus in each bucket. Prior to adding the cement, I will add just a little bit of water, and then as this comes to the full mix, then I will add enough water to give me the consistency that I'm looking for. In the mixing, I recommended you pour approximately half of your cement into the bucket first to get the blend going, and then add the remainder after that. And by splitting that bag in half, that actually helps prevent the clumping of the cement in the mix. Now, upon the completion of my initial mix, what I will do is I will allow this to take up for 10 minutes. The reason for the take up is it allows everything to be completely hydrated, so that it gives you longer workability time. And now that we've allowed the primus to fully hydrate after 10 minutes, we're going to mix this back up in preparation for the foam adhesive. Okay, as you'll see, I'll break the false stack. And now I'll mix this for a minute just to break up any clumps that might be there and fully finish the hydration of the material and loosen it up for application. Prior to us starting the application of the foam, I do want to review a few details. First of all, the well has actually been coated with our backstop NTX with your appropriate detailing of the fasteners in the joints. For that information, please review the application instructions. I've also installed detail mesh that we can show the back wrapping and proper back wrapping technique on that. Now let's take a look at the tools in the application itself. First of all, and I want to reiterate and press that we make sure that we're using the proper notch trowel. The notch trowel should be 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch by 2 inch spacing. On the EPS board, you need to make sure that you've got the EPS board that is grooved and the edges are chamfered. When installing the adhesive, you want to make sure that you are placing the adhesive in between the grooves. You want to make sure that no adhesive gets into the grooves. If you do, you should clearly remove that from there. And here's a good view of what you should come up with. You'll see there's some areas that have a little bit of adhesive in there. I can just take that, lightly clean it up, and that provides more than a sufficient drainage plane of the groove film. And then I will take this and stick it to the wall. Again, typically I will have a proper alignment with skid edge. Any application of the foam, you want to make sure that as your boards are, you can see here where I split a board in half. You must have a staggered board every other course. So you can see here, I actually split them in halves. And that completes the installation of the foam. So now that the adhesive had the proper time to dry, a minimum of 24 hours, now you need to inspect the wall to see if any areas that may need to have slivers and or spray foam installed in joints in excess of 1/16 of an inch. Once that's done, you would come back, cut those off so that it is flush, and then you will start to rasp the building. In doing so, recommendation is to rasp the joints. You will rasp them on a 45-degree angle, such as this. Again, the purpose of this is to bring everything back to plane, and by rasping it on a 45, you don't get any indentations that will be visible on the project. Upon completion of the rasping of the wall, we can move forward with the application or installation of the base coat and mesh. Again, I do want to point out with the mesh, we want to be using the intermediate mesh and only the intermediate mesh when using the MBS system. And again, when doing your detail mesh, you want to pull the sides in first, embedding the mesh there, and then work from your center out. That will prevent any of the mesh from balling up so that you don't have to cut it and recoat that. So in the application of the intermediate mesh, this mesh has a curl to it. The best method is to make sure that the curl is in against the wall. It will make it much easier for you to do your install and get the material up there. As you can see, all I did is touch across the top. That holds it in place. I'll clear the top first, come down the center, and then work my way out to properly embed the mesh. Again, when working with the masonry veneer system, when you're working on the corners, I recommend that you use a corner trowel. The purpose behind that is when you're going to put a corner stone or corner brick on, it allows it to stay tight and bond to the whole surface. If you have an area that's protruding, it doesn't allow to get you a good alignment and a good bond to the corners. And finally, you just want to do some minor clean up for any high spots that you may see. But with that, that's the completion of the base coat and mesh in preparation for the installation of the veneer. So now that the base coat and mesh has had a chance to dry, it is required to place supplemental fasteners throughout the wall. You should refer to your specifications for that placement for the different substrates and the different studs. In this example, we're using the mechanical fasteners over metal studs. Those are going to be placed every 24 inches across the board, so I will do that at this point. And now that the fasteners have been placed, you will want to place the cap over top of them, and then you can either spot them before you start the application of the MVS, or you can spot them during the MVS installation. And now that we've mixed up our primus with cement, we actually have two different consistency. The adhesive will be a very thick consistency. We will take part of that after we've mixed it. We will move that into another bucket and we will thin that down. The purpose behind that is, first of all, the thicker consistency, we're going to come back and spot our fasteners. You can spot that a day before if you like, or further, or you can spot it just before you start the adhesive of the veneer. In that, the thinner coat will actually be used to apply just a real tight coat. What that will do for the system is it will take that initial suction away from when you put on your brick veneer, and it will create a much better bond. So let's get started. And you can see how thin this material is. Again, and when you're doing your installation of this, you're going to take a small section, maybe 2x4 or 3x3. You don't want to be too big because you don't want this material to dry out on the wall. And as I said, I'm pulling that extremely tight. Again, it's just masoning that wall. So now I'm going to take one of the brick veneer, take the thicker mud, okay? Putting approximately 3/16 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch of mud on the back, covering the whole back. Now that the adhesive on the brick has had an opportunity to dry for a minimum of 24 hours, we're going to mix up the mortar to place in the mortar joints. The mortar that you use should be verified for color and texture prior to installing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take and mix up the mortar as it is. Again, we take your water, again, when I mix this, I always try to mix a small amount first to start it off to make sure that the dried material doesn't gather at the bottom of the bucket and get stuck to the corners. Your mortar should be mixed to a consistency that you're comfortable taking out of either the bag or your application instrument. And now that I've completed the initial mix, I want to reiterate a couple things. Number one, we should allow the mortar to rest for at least 10 minutes to fully hydrate. The other thing is the mortar that you're going to use should be designed by the manufacturer of the veneer that you will be placing on the wall. The mortar has now had the opportunity to fully hydrate after 10 minutes. We're going to break the faucet. We may need to add a little bit of water to get it to the consistency that we like to work with when we're installing it onto the wall. And now that we have this fully mixed, we'll start the application of the mortar to the mortar joints. Before we get fully started I want to go through some of the tools that you may want to use. Again, a scoop. What I find the scoop easy to do is make sure that the mortar gets into the bag without dirtying the bag up. We like to use a mortar bag, but again, there's several other apparatuses that you could use for that installation that becomes a tool of choice. And finally, you'll need a tool to strike the joints. And again, while installing the material, you want to make sure that you have enough flow that it protrudes slightly out in front of the face of the brick in this instance. And now that we've completed the installation of the mortar, we're going to allow it to take up. You want to wait till it is dry to the touch or firm before you start striking it with your tool. Now that we've installed the mortar, we've allowed it to take up. And let me show you what that appears to be. When you press on this, it'll be firm, okay? And I'll have nothing that comes off on my fingertips. That will make it clean for it to strike it and for the mortar to fall down. So after my initial strike and my final strike, what I will do is I'll come back with a brush. I will lightly brush this. I'm always taking the brush on a 45-degree angle of all the joints. The reason for that is so that I don't penetrate into the mortar joint and creating a different texture and look through the whole thing. What this will actually do is it will take the burrs off anything that's hanging along the way. Sometimes I'll take the tool, I'll find some areas that are a little bit thicker that I may have to pull it off and flick it off. And with that, that concludes the full installation of the twin brick veneer install. If you need additional information, please contact your local distributor or sales rep, or look us up on the internet at dryvit.com. And now let's prepare the adhesive for the masonry veneer stone. If you recall earlier, we spoke about the mix for the adhesive for the brick veneer. That was slightly thinner than what you get with the consistency for the adhesive for the stone veneer. As we've split our bucket in half. We have 30 pounds of the Primus adhesive. We will mix, again, type 1 or GU Portland cement. And again, I always start out with counting a portion of the bag just to start the initial mix. From here, you're going to take approximately 10 ounces of water and add to the mix. You may adjust that just slightly, but you're not going to want to add too much water. The purpose of that is so that we have a thick consistency of the adhesive, that when we stick it onto the stone to the wall, that it actually holds it tight and fast and it does not slide or fall off. And right now is typically a good time to add that, get a mix going so that your water and everything is combined with the Primus in the existing cement. And then again, I will add an additional about 50% of the remaining cement. And then I add the final amount. After mixing it, again, I'm going to allow it to set for 10 minutes to fully hydrate. At that point, we will actually remove a small amount of that into a separate bucket, add some water to thin that down for our initial coating of the material. Now that the adhesive has had at least 10 minutes to hydrate, we're going to move forward in the final mix of that, and then also additional mix for the initial thin coat over the wall. And again, the purpose of the two different, the adhesive and then the skim coat. The skim coat, what that does is it will take the initial shock away from that adhesive because there's little moisture in the adhesive material. That helps it create a much better bond and holds better for you. And now we're going to move forward with adhesively attaching the masonry stone. Now, what I want to suggest to you is proper staging of your job site as you move through. You can move through faster if you've got the staging. Again, you need to determine what will work best for you. Again, I want to remind you what I need to do to the wall. First of all, I'm going to need to spot the fasteners. From there, I will then skim coat the wall to help prevent that initial suction or promote better adhesion. And while I'm doing that, Corey will be assisting me. He'll be putting the adhesive on the back of the stone so that I can start placing the stone from there. And as I said, I've had a second mix and you'll be able to see the consistency. This is very, very thin, okay? So then again, that will bond and help everything bond much better to the wall. I do want to make you aware, when you're doing the application, you only want to cover a small portion of the wall with the thin material. The reason for that is so that the material doesn't dry out and now you're not accomplishing the purpose of that material. So on the back of the lit masonry veneer, again, the stone, you can look at the thickness and the consistency that is on this. What I'd like to do is demonstrate how this actually helps this bond and hold to the wall. As you can see, is the stone does not slide or doesn't move. Again, that's the benefit of the thickness of the material of the adhesive. Upon the completion of the installation of the veneer, you're going to want to wait at least 3 days to come back where you can clean it with a proper cleaning solution. You should refer to your manufacturer of the veneer to know the appropriate cleaning. And that concludes the video of our installation of the Masonry Veneer System. If you have any questions or would like some training, please contact your local distributor or sales rep. If you need additional information, you can go online at dryvit.com. Thank you and have a great day.